Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Cy Kellett, your host. As promised, Jimmy Akin here with us for another hour of open forum. You are welcome to call with whatever question you've got, 888-318-7884. Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here, also the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Hello, Jimmy Akin.
Hello, Cyril Kellett.
And nothing's dropping tomorrow on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. I'm not going to make that mistake again. But Friday, what's coming up?
Flying snakes.
Oh, that's right. I'm not looking for the. Isn't that a dragon?
Indiana Jones reaction. Why did it have to be flying snakes?
Why? They're not fire breathing though.
No, they're not fire breathing. They're not dragons. They're just snakes. In fact, according to Herodotus, they're actually rather small.
No, well, then you can't see them coming. This is making me nervous. The small flying snakes. Herodotus, the historian of
the father of
Peloponnesian
history.
War. Yeah.
It's named after his book, Historiae in Greek, or Histories in English.
And so he was also accumulating data on the natural world, and he had heard things about flying snakes.
Yeah, among other things. He was basically a tourist. And he went all kinds of places and asked people questions. He was very inquisitive. And he then recorded what he wrote in his histories. And he was so influential, they named the discipline after him, which is why he's known as the father of history. He also distinguished between things he was told and things he saw himself. Mm-hmm. So he let you know what his source was, whether it was hearsay or whether it was eyewitness, and he let you make up your own mind about sometimes controversial and mysterious topics. So he's kind of the patron historian of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, because that's what I try to do. Present the data, let you know the sources, you make up your own mind. He also did say, though, that he saw an enormous pile of bones of the flying snakes when he investigated them. He went to a city called Buto, and the priests took him out and showed him this huge pile of bones of the flying snakes.
Well, now sometimes those were dinosaur bones in those days.
Maybe.
Okay. Now I got to listen to the Flying Snakes episode. All right, you got me. Check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World just by typing in Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, or go to mysterious.fm. We're going to start out in Dallas today. Robin's in Dallas listening on Catholic.com. Robin, I think you have waited a long time. Thank you very much for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
No problem. Question. I try to keep my children, of course, we're all Catholic, cradle Catholics, and my middle child, they have a friend who, they're Protestant, and they were asked to baptize his child, the friend's child. And I was like, I don't think you can do that. I think you just need to go into your church. So they Googled and looked it up, and they said, no, that it can be done. Is that true? That they can go baptize this child?
Okay, so I need some clarity. When you say so you're asking, can your son or son
be a godparent?
Be a godparent. Okay.
Friend's child.
That is okay. That's different than like the parents have died and you're going to raise the child as they wanted it raised, and it's different than they're asking you to pour water on the child's head and actually do the baptism. We're just talking being a godparent, and according to the Directory for Ecumenism, Catholics are permitted not to be the godparents of a Protestant child. You can be the godparent of an Eastern Orthodox child, but they are permitted to be witnesses to the baptism. And so, your son and or daughter-in-law could be witnesses, and they could unofficially refer to them as godparents, but they wouldn't formally be godparents.
Okay. Because okay. Well, then that makes sense. I will try to send that message to them. So I was like, no, you can't. Because how are you going? You are supposed to lead that child in your faith. How are you going to lead that child in your faith, your Catholic faith, if the family is Protestant?
Well, they can lead them in the Christian faith, because we share more in common than we share the core of the Christian faith together. So Protestants are our brothers and sisters in Christ, and you can lead the child in Christian faith, and you can even let them know about the Catholic faith, if the parents are okay with that. But I wouldn't say just no, you can't. It's like when you're dealing with when you're dealing with a child, and you have to tell the child, well, you can't do this. What you can do instead is say, but you can do this other thing that gets you where you want to go. And even if you can't be a full godparent for a Protestant child, you can still play a part in the ceremony. You can stand up. You can be a witness to the ceremony. And if they want to unofficially call you a godparent and you have a role in helping educate the child in the Christian faith, you can do that. You just can't be a full, proper, official godparent.
Robin, thank you very much for getting us started. This open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest. And now we go off to Portland, Oregon, where John is listening on Modern Day Radio. John, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hello, and Jimmy, I have a question. I was listening to the show before. My youngest son is over 18, and I'm new to being a Catholic, meaning 2 years, even though I was baptized Catholic. And then I just literally God just called me to do that. So I'm not the expert on knowing anything that you guys do, but I will tell you that basically I've come to realization, thanks to God and thanks to many means, that after becoming Catholic after a divorce from my only wife, I was pretty bitter for quite a long time, and I just want to not just repent, but take my, go back to my boys, and just not make any excuses. And I don't want to make a God out of it, but you know what I mean? That's what I'm asking.
So you're asking, I'm actually not clear on what you're asking. Could you phrase it as a question?
How does a father go back to his children and make things right if he was speaking so badly over the years to their mom?
Okay. Well, I would say, assuming you have, current contact with them or are able to get into contact with them, I would say, and you could do this in individual conversations with them, or if you think it would work this way, you could, get together with them and take them all out to dinner and say, listen, I want to let you know that I'm not proud of everything I did. I think that I was unfair, or at least did things in a way that I shouldn't have. And I apologize that you had to see that. And I have had a revolution in my life, and I've come to realize that I should have taken a different approach. And so I want you to know that I'm sincere, and I plan on doing things differently in the future. And I wanted to share that with you. And I hope that you can forgive me for any impact it had on you. And if there's anything I can ever do to, build a better relationship with y'all, then I want to do that. And I'm really sincere about that. And I hope you'll let me know, because I really do love you, all of you. And so I'm just kind of opening my heart to you and letting you know where I'm at, and that I do regret the way that I handled things in the past, and I aim to do better in the future. And I hope that you appreciate that, and I hope you can still love me.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for the call. It's open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest. 888-318-7884, the number. We got to take a quick break. Be right back with more open forum after this.
Your questions, Catholic Answers, live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Saints are the heroes of the Catholic faith. They serve as examples for all Catholics, showing us how to lead a more satisfying, more spiritual life in communion with our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. View our comprehensive documentation of saints who serve as theologians and doctors of the Church. Visit EWTN.com and click Catholicism. EWTN is the Global Catholic Network.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Open Forum continues. Jimmy Akin, our guest. The number 888-318-7884. And there are just loads and loads of people on the line. Well, there's one line open now, and you can give it a try, 888-318-7884. But we will keep moving. Anonymous is in Nebraska, listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Anonymous, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Can you hear me okay?
Very well.
Okay. It's about, I'm the grandparent of two different grandkids getting married next summer. I'll take one at a time, the questions. First, one of them said that their priest is going to try and get it okay to their bishop, which is a different diocese than mine. I do know the priest, but he's going to try and get it okay to the bishop that the other one's grandparent is a Baptist minister and have them get married at the recreational hall.
Uh-huh.
I didn't think much of it. I didn't know if that was valid, that they do that, if the bishop okays it.
Yeah, so under ordinary circumstances, Catholics are required to observe the Catholic form of marriage, which means, among other things, getting married by either your pastor or another Catholic priest or deacon that your pastor delegates it to. However, in cases where you have a Catholic marrying a Protestant Christian, the bishop can give what's known as a dispensation from form. So ordinarily, Catholics are required to observe the Catholic form of marriage, but this is not a part of divine law. This is part of church law. And so the bishop can make a dispensation or a modification in a particular case to allow them to get married without having to observe the Catholic form of marriage. This is typically done when they want to get married in a Protestant church, and the Protestant minister who performs the ceremony can be anybody that is authorized to do so in the Protestant church. So if the other grandparent is a Protestant pastor and he's authorized to perform marriage ceremonies in the Protestant church, then the Catholic party could get a dispensation from form from the bishop in order to get married in the Protestant church by a Protestant minister, and it'll be a perfectly valid marriage that's legitimate and recognized by the Catholic Church as valid.
Okay. They said actually they were going to try and talking about getting married in the hall where they're going to have the reception.
And that's not material to the case, because where it happens,
right,
it doesn't matter. Once you're dispensed from form, if it was a Catholic ceremony, it would ordinarily need to take place in a sacred place like a parish. But if they've been dispensed from form, then they don't have to observe that aspect of the Catholic form, and it could be in a church hall or somewhere else.
Okay, good, because I had kids get married and we went. My wife is gone now; she's passed away. But we wouldn't go to the kids' wedding because of other stuff. But then I thought, man, am I in a bind? I thought, Lord, take me home so I don't have to deal with this. But no, I did think about. I know the priest, but he's not my pastor. Well, why don't you suggest that to get married in the church, even the Baptist? But anyways, I'll probably just have to let it go.
You might.
But I'll see.
Did you have a second question for Jimmy?
Yes, because it's another marriage and is a grandchild. And this one, they want the priest to say do the marriage, but they don't want to travel that far. They want to go halfway in between where they're going to have the reception. And I thought, they're talking about having the priest see if he can get a dispensation to say it at the hall instead of going to a church. And I thought, I never heard of. And then the other thing, I did check today. None of us are from that town, but I checked, and that the secretary said, well, yeah, I didn't tell her all the details because I didn't want it all out, but she said, yes, they have a Catholic church right there, and it would be air-conditioned, and it would be plenty big enough for the wedding.
Okay, so you want... Go ahead.
My question was, I go to someone, say, to the priest, see, that's me being the grandparent. Do I say something to my kids? Do I say something to my grandkids? Do I say something to the priest? But I thought that they're going that way. Why couldn't the priest just go to that church instead of marrying them in that town in the rec hall? Because I didn't think they.
Well, okay. So what I can tell you is, if they get the proper approvals, then they could get married in a church hall. So it's going to come down to, do they get the proper permissions? You can always suggest that they use the church that's in this town, but if they get the proper permissions, it will still be valid anyway, even if it's not in the church itself, but in a church hall or a community hall or something.
And Anonymous, thank you very much. I'm going to leave that there. We got every single line full. On we go to Anastasia in New York, listening on the Catholic Answers app. Anastasia, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi. So on Sunday, my priest in his sermon explained that Jesus had made a mistake about God's will, that he was there first for the Jews, and he said he made a mistake. He did not know God's will, but he corrected the mistake, and later learned that it was God's will to go for him to go for all the people. So my question is just, can Jesus be wrong? Because that kind of sounded like Arianism to me.
Okay. Let's find out if Jesus can be wrong.
So it's going to depend on your theory of how Jesus's human knowledge works. Now, clearly in his divine intellect, he knows everything. He's omniscient, and therefore he's not capable of making a mistake in his divine intellect. But could he be mistaken in his human intellect? Well, according to a common theory historically, Jesus, in his human intellect, knew everything there is to know about the actual world. He didn't know, because the human intellect can't be omniscient. It can't have infinite knowledge. So according to this common theory, which was shared, for example, by St. Thomas Aquinas, he didn't know about every possible world, but he did know everything about the actual world. And that would include God's will for the actual world. Therefore, he would not be able to be mistaken about anything that pertained to the actual world. However, this theory, although it's historically very common, is not as popular today as it once was. And many modern theologians have adopted a position, Orthodox Catholic theologians have adopted a position, that Jesus didn't have all knowledge about the infinite, about the actual world, because that would still be a colossally huge amount of knowledge that would seem to far transcend anything a human intellect might be able to contain. But instead, they would say that he knew everything in his human intellect that pertained to his mission. And if you look in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it appears to endorse this view. It says that that what he confessed he didn't know, he elsewhere declared that he had not been sent to reveal. So it was not part of his mission to reveal certain things, and therefore he didn't have that information downloaded into his human intellect from his divine intellect. However, that's not going to rescue your priest friend, because who Jesus's mission is to is part of his mission. And therefore, he did have that information downloaded, no matter which theory you have of his human knowledge, whether you think he knew everything about the actual world, or whether you think he just knew what pertained to his mission in the actual world. Either way, he would have known what God wants him to do regarding Jews and Gentiles, because that's part of his mission. So I would say that regardless of, what Jesus might or might not be able to do in other circumstances, he would not be able to be mistaken in this circumstance. And your priest friend has a misapprehension, a misunderstanding of what's going on in this passage.
Anastasia, that makes sense to you?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the call. Let's go to Michael in New York, listening also on the Catholic Answers app. Michael, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hey, Jimmy. So a Protestant brought up a good point to me. They said, if Mary's not omniscient, then how can she hear all our prayers, know all our intentions and hear all the rosaries and everything like that?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Michael, let me ask you a question. Will you pray for me after you get off the phone with us and just ask God to bless me? Can you do that for me?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Now, let me ask you a second question. Are you omniscient?
Obviously not.
But you still know about my prayer request, even though I didn't make it to you face to face, right?
Yes, but you're just one person asking it directly to me.
Let's deal with one issue at a time. So even though I'm not talking to you face to face, you still somehow learned about my prayer request, right?
Yes.
And the way you learned about it in this case happened to be through technological means, because even though we're not face to face, we have a technological video link or at least audio link between us so that you're able to learn about my prayer request. And the common opinion historically has been that that's how the saints learn about our prayers, not technologically, but through the medium of God. God serves as an intermediary. God knows about our prayers, and he channels that information to the saints and lets them know someone wants your prayers. Now, that's one way that they could learn about our prayers. There are others, but that's at least one way. So we've shown that it's possible for saints to learn about our prayers without being physically present. Now, you then raised a second issue, which is the volume of prayers that Mary receives. And it seems to me that there are three possible solutions here. The first one is maybe a saint doesn't know all of our prayers in detail, but they do know that, that we want their prayers. This is kind of like here on earth. I may know that various people would like me to pray for them, and I may not know the details of their request. In fact, sometimes people will just say things like, will you pray for a special intention I've got? Or will you pray for my nephew, even though I don't know the nephew's name? And I can then pray in a general way for whatever the person's intention is, or whatever the nephew is, whatever his name is, I can pray for him in a general way, even though I don't know all the details. So if we can do that here on earth, then saints in heaven could certainly do that with no upgrades. God could let them know that there are a bunch of people who want your prayers, and the saint, being a loving person, can say, well, then God, I want to pray for all those people, whoever they are and whatever their needs are. And they could pray for them in a general way without a boost in their level of knowledge. There's another, so that's the first solution. The other two solutions are going to be more popular. I only mentioned that first one to show the raw possibility that there are solutions to this. But the other two solutions are going to be more practical, are going to be more popular. The second solution is going to be time doesn't work the same way in the afterlife that it does here. This is another common theological opinion from the Middle Ages and before, that the saints are not bound by time in the way we are, and therefore they don't have the same information processing limits that we have here on earth. So consequently, it doesn't matter how long it would take them in earthly time to learn about and respond to these prayer requests. The time just doesn't work the same way. So they're not bound by the limited amount of time they would be bound by here on earth in dealing with a large volume of prayers. The third solution is God gives them an upgrade. We even see that happening in the Bible in the case of Balaam's ass. It's just a donkey, but God seems to give it an intellectual upgrade temporarily that allows it to process more information than a donkey can normally process, and it speaks to Balaam in a human way. Well, God can do the same thing for us. I would expect that we're going to have an intellectual upgrade in the afterlife. We're going to be able to process more information than we're able to process right now. In fact, That's even reported in studies of what are called near-death experiences, where someone experiences clinical death, like let's say their heart stops, so they suffer cardiac arrest, and then they continue to have experiences in the afterlife before the medical technicians are able to restart their heart. And when they come back from that death experience, they're able to describe their experiences on the other side. And they frequently say, I had this colossal amount of knowledge when I was on the other side. I was not limited by my brain anymore. I knew all kinds of stuff, and now I can't remember it because I'm back in my body. So we may well have a giant intellectual upgrade in the afterlife.
Michael, thank you for the question. More to come. Open Forum with Jimmy Akin continues on Catholic Answers Live. As Catholic apologetics have gotten stronger, Protestant responses have gotten stronger as well. And now they have their own answers to rebut the standard Catholic proofs. Don't fret, we've got you covered. In his new book, Meeting the Protestant Response, apologist Carlo Broussard gives well-reasoned biblical answers to Protestant comebacks. Order your copy of Meeting the Protestant Response today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Is relativism dead? It sure seems dead. Each day, new moral demands are made and they are presented to us as absolutes. Everything, from transgender ideology to physician-assisted suicide, is presented as a moral good that all right-thinking people must accept. But Catholic Answers' own Carlo Broussard says look deeper, and you will see today's moralism is just relativism dressed up in new clothes. Carlo's eye-opening book, The New Relativism, shines a light on how the sacred moral teachings of this age cover up a deep denial of moral truth. Order your copy of The New Relativism today at shop.catholic.com and be prepared to defend the truth against aggressive relativism. The New Relativism at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Dr. David Anders here. Where is purgatory in the Bible? Why confess my sins to a priest?
Find out more tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern on Call to Communion.
Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's open forum. There's a couple lines open now. 888-318-7884 is the number. We'll get you on. If you call now, we'll get you on with Jimmy before the end of the hour. 888-318-7884. Anybody's welcome with any question at all. And we go now to Michael in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. Michael, thanks for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hello, gentlemen. Thanks for taking my call. I have a kind of a general question, overview of like when we look at the Bible, we understand that there's healings done by priests, by the apostles, or by religious people, possibly in the Old Testament. Are there any incidents in the Bible that there's non-religious that actually perform a miracle? And I'm not necessarily thinking about a miracle of maybe changing somebody's heart or faith necessarily, which is a beautiful miracle, but something that where they're healed of a wound or something like that.
Okay, so I'm not actually familiar with passages where Old Testament or New Testament priests who aren't also something else, like an apostle or a prophet, perform miracles. And by perform, I have to put an asterisk there because properly speaking, it's God that performs the miracle, or at least he authorizes someone like an angel to perform it. But I know that's not what you're talking about. We're talking about humans who occasioned a miracle, and that could who were involved in a miracle, and that could happen a couple of different ways. It could be God tells the human to do something, and then he'll perform a miracle, like when he tells Moses to stretch out his rod over the Nile, and he's going to turn it to blood. Or it could happen when a human makes a request of God, and then God performs a miracle in response, like when the prophet Elisha has this woman whose son has died, and he prays to God to raise the son from death, and then he like stretches out his body on top of the son, and God brings the son back to life. So you could have a person involved in a couple of ways. God could take the initiative and say, you do X and I'll do a miracle. Or you could have the human taking the initiative and say, God, please perform a miracle here, and then God does it. In terms of do we have people who are not notable religious figures? Like, well, I should say everybody who's going to be involved in a miracle one way or another is going to be religious in some sense. Otherwise, they're not going to be talking to God in the first place. Someone who doesn't worship God at all, doesn't believe in God at all, they're not talking to God at all. So they're going to be religious in some sense, but that doesn't mean they're a notable religious figure like an apostle or a prophet or something like that. And the answer is, yeah, we do sometimes see ordinary people in Scripture doing something, typically in response to prayer. If they're not a prophet, God usually doesn't talk to them and say, go do this and I'll perform a miracle. Instead, they take the initiative and they go to God and they say, will you please do something here? And an example of that occurs to me off the top of my head is Elkanah's wife. At the beginning of 1 Samuel, you got this guy named Elkanah. He's got two wives, one of whom has children, the other of whom does not. And the one that doesn't have any children is really broken up about this because she really wants children, like lots of Hebrew women did. And so she is complaining to her husband and she's saying, give me children or I'll die. And he says to his wife, well, am I in the place of God? I'm not the one who closed your womb. I'm not the one keeping you from having children. And so she goes to the tabernacle because the temple hasn't been built yet. And she is praying there, and she's praying really fervently. And the priest, the high priest at the time, is a guy named Eli. And Eli sees her praying, and he sees her lips moving because she's just so wrapped up in her prayer. She's praying silently, but her lips are moving, and he thinks she's drunk because this is not the way people typically prayed at the time. And so he tells her to put aside her wine, and she explains what's going on. But she prays, and she then goes home and she conceives the prophet Samuel. And so she's Samuel's mom, and she was just an ordinary woman who was praying to God because she was suffering from an infertility problem, and God answered her prayer and allowed her to conceive miraculously. So I would say there are people in Scripture who, just like today, who pray to God, and God answers their prayer in a way that's remarkable and thus counts as a miracle.
I'm going to leave that there because, again, lines have filled up. So we'll go to an anonymous caller on Modern Day Radio. Anonymous, thank you very much for the call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, Cy. Hi, Jimmy.
Hi.
There is a person who has a service dog for medical needs.
Okay.
Who requires frequent this person requires frequent hand touch contact with the dog that can at times make it difficult to pray the rosary. This person has devised a way to use the service dog as a rosary with landmarks on the dog's body corresponding to place markers in the rosary. A, is this okay? And B, through being used in this way, could any risk of spiritual harm come to the dog?
Okay, so I don't see a fundamental problem here. I sometimes count on my fingers when I'm saying the rosary, and I even count as a kind of sign of solidarity with the deaf community. I'll even count in American Sign Language because in American Sign Language, you count from 1 to 10 on a single hand. So, and it's a little bit different. The three, for example, looks different in American Sign Language than the typical way Americans make three. I don't know. We don't have. I don't know how many people can see video of this, but in American Sign Language, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I'll count the Hail Marys that way, and that's using my own body. If someone has a dog that they need to be in physical contact with and they're able to use landmarks on the dog's body, I don't see a problem with that. Now, it's not a blessed rosary that you're using, but you could always, I guess I could take my hand and have a priest bless it for purposes of saying the rosary. Or I could take a dog and have them bless the dog for purposes of using it as landmarks on its body as a rosary. There's nothing that prohibits this. I don't see anything in principle wrong with this. And if you do it, well, you're asking the Virgin Mary and God to help you out. I don't see how it's going to harm the dog in any spiritual way. So that if anything, the dog, by being brought into this prayer, would be subsumed under the Virgin Mary and God's protection. I would expect the dog to not be hurt at all by it.
I hope that was helpful for you. Thank you very, very much for the question. I'm going to go to, where am I going now? Sorry. Let me go to Kent in Champaign, Illinois, listening on Catholic.com. Kent, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My question has to do with whether or not anybody's given any thought to how the purely spiritual world of the angelic beings, and for that matter, God, interfaces or connects with the material world. Because we, if you get down at the very basic level, are actually composed of quantum mechanical particles. Mm-hmm. And those are inherently random. And there's something called the quantum observer principle, which can affect the randomness. So I was wondering if any thought has been given to whether or not that could be the interface.
The answer is yes, thought has been given to that, and in particular, various folks in the parapsychological community have been thinking about the interface of how does consciousness interact with matter, and the quantum level is one of the proposals. So there's actually been a lot of discussion of this. Unfortunately, there aren't any firm conclusions in this area. And part of the reason for that is we're not actually sure how things work on the quantum mechanical level. For people who may not know, quantum mechanics is the study of phenomena. I'm going to simplify it, but it's the study of phenomena that are very, very small. And quantum mechanical phenomena cannot be rigorously predicted. It's not like, knocking one billiard ball into another and you know exactly where the second billiard ball is going to go. There's an element of unpredictability to quantum mechanical phenomena such that you can sketch what's likely to happen, but there's actually a range of possibilities for what could happen. And there's a question of, okay, so what makes the final determination of what's going to happen? To use a quantum mechanical term, what collapses the waveform? What makes the final determination that takes it from it's something in this range to it's this specific value? And the answer is there are different theories about quantum mechanics and what does that, what makes the final determination. One of the proposals, and actually there are several variations on this, but one of the proposals is that it's taking an observation or measurement or the effect of consciousness. which you mentioned. So the idea would be if there's some consciousness that's observing a quantum mechanical process, it may lock it in to having a specific value. But that's not the only interpretation of quantum mechanics. There's actually a bunch of different interpretations, including one that says we just can't know, so shut up and calculate. But there are others. There is, for example, a position known as superdeterminism that says that actually, even though we can't predict exactly what the outcome value is going to be, there are hidden variables that do predict it. It's just we don't have access to those variables, so we can't predict it. And on that theory, you wouldn't have an observer effect that would be bringing about a specific outcome. So there has been a lot of discussion of this, particularly in parapsychological circles, but we really don't know how quantum mechanics works, and there are different interpretations of it. And so consequently, we have a good bit of speculation and a little bit of theory in this area, or at least hypotheses in this area, but we don't know for sure. But it is something that's being explored.
We got to take a not randomly timed break. We'll be right back with more Open Forum on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
In Morse code, the sequence SOS is a distress call. It's been said that it stands for Save Our Souls. Well, right now our world is in big trouble, and we're putting out an SOS call for help. Will you answer that call? St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, has hundreds of teams who share the good news with souls who don't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to get involved.
Daily Dose of Encouragement, hosted by Patty Schneier, provides insightful and inspirational thoughts by bringing spiritual insights to everyday living. You can hear Daily Dose of Encouragement as well as faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates across the nation, all in one place, all free at EWTN Podcast Central. Visit EWTNradio.net/podcasts today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest. It's Open Forum. Flying snakes is the topic on this week's Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. So if you're not into flying snakes, you got to catch Jimmy here on Catholic Answers Live. Give a call, 888-318-7884, if you have a question. We're going to Bloomington, Illinois. Hilda, listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Hilda, I think you're about the fourth caller, maybe the fifth today from Spirit Catholic Radio. That's a very nice record. It's nice to have you here. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yes, we like you here.
Well, that's good to hear.
Well, I was listening to a previous caller, and Jimmy was trying to explain how sometimes when you have a near-death experience, somebody will have expanded knowledge. Well, it triggered a thought in my mind because I have had, since I was little, these dreams, and I have them, and then it's like very detailed. And then I wake up and I don't have access to the knowledge. However, while I'm living life, all of a sudden it'll trigger that I've seen this before and I'm supposed to do something, but I can't access the knowledge, and it happens exactly like it was. So can you have that kind of expanded knowledge here on Earth, I guess is my question. I've also had a few things like with souls in purgatory too. So just trying to give you a little bit of information because I'm kind of wondering about it, and I always tried to distance myself from it because I didn't want it to be diabolical, I guess.
Okay. Well, I don't think that it's likely that a person is going to be able to have the same kind of dramatically expanded knowledge that people report in near-death experiences, because when someone is having a near-death experience, they report being untethered from their body. So they're, at least based on their report of what they experienced, they indicate, I was not using my body, which would entail I was not using my brain. I was disconnected from my brain, and that allowed me to have much more knowledge, the secrets of the universe compared to what I have now. But when we're asleep, we are still connected to our body and our brain. So I wouldn't expect us to have the full scope of knowledge that we're likely to have in the afterlife. But that doesn't mean we don't have expanded knowledge. There are situations where people come up with information in dreams that they don't seem to have, that there doesn't seem to be a natural explanation for. I've had that experience. I've had various dreams that seem to predict what happened the next day, even though I would have no natural way of predicting it. It wasn't something you would expect to happen, but it did anyway. And so these at least appeared to be precognitive dreams. And St. Thomas Aquinas says, yeah, that can happen. St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine. So these are two doctors of the church. They're not just saints. They're actually among the creme de la creme of theologians. They've been declared doctors of the church. Both St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas believed in what we would call precognition. And St. Thomas Aquinas called it natural prophecy to distinguish it from the supernatural prophecy that God gives. And St. Thomas Aquinas discusses it in terms of happening in dreams. He gives dreams as an example of where this kind of expanded awareness may happen. It's not infallible like supernatural prophecy is, but it does, according to Aquinas, predict the future in a probable way. And he doesn't think there's anything wrong with it. He says this is not divination. You're not consulting, demons or anything like that. It's not demonic. This is a natural human ability, according to Augustine and Aquinas. So we have within the Catholic tradition a recognition that we can have expanded awareness. God also clearly can give us, expanded information in dreams. We see that in the Bible. Very often, prophets, for example, and sometimes other people like Judah Maccabee, who was a warrior rather than a prophet, will have dreams in which God gives them visions, and in most cases of things that are going to happen in the future, or sometimes a peek into the supernatural world. In Second Maccabees, for example, Judah Maccabee has a dream in which he sees the deceased prophet the deceased high priest Onias and the deceased prophet Jeremiah, and he has a conversation with them. Now, they didn't appear to be being purified, but there have been lots of people in Catholic history who've reported, yeah, I got a dream of someone in purgatory. God gave me this dream and let me talk to the person in purgatory, and now I know about their needs, and I'm going to, pray for them or whatever. So I wouldn't view these things, demonically. Now, just like John says in 1 John 4, we want to test the spirit, so we don't want to just automatically believe every spirit that appears to us. But, if someone appears to me in a dream and seems to be in purgatory and wants prayer, well, I'll pray for them. If they start telling me I need to worship Baal, well, I know that's not God's will. So either this is a part of my subconscious that's messing with me, or, like it's just a nightmare, having someone in a dream tell me I need to worship Baal, that would be a nightmare. Or it could be a demon. But either way, I'm not going to start worshiping Baal. What about your situations where you have an experience of greater knowledge in a dream, but then you can't retrieve that knowledge once you're awake? I don't know that is a direct parallel to the NDE situation, because it seems like in that case, there's a problem downloading the information from an unembodied experience to an embodied experience. However, I would be more inclined to look at the phenomena you described of, I knew this, but I can't remember it now, as just a normal part of the dreaming process. Most of our dreams are not highly reliable. And so consequently, we seem to be programmed to forget them. in fact, you have to train yourself if you want to remember them in a more consistent way. And there are ways to train yourself to do that. But if we're not making that special effort, what we dreamed about vanishes from our mind within a few seconds of waking up usually. And the purpose of that apparently is to help keep us from getting confused. Because if we just automatically remembered everything we dreamed about, we would have a harder time distinguishing what's a dream from what's real. The fact that we normally forget all of our dreams makes it much easier to identify what's real and what's not. So there seems to be a survival value to not having our memories filled up with confabulation that's hard to distinguish from waking experience. And so at least under most circumstances, we automatically forget our dreams. And I would think that's probably a more probable explanation of why you would seem to have expanded awareness in a dream and then can't remember it. It's just normal to forget your dreams.
Hilda, thanks very much for that call. I'm going to keep moving because we're getting near the end here and I want to try to get as many on as I can. We're going now to Poland. Bartek is in Poland watching on YouTube. Is that right? Yep, on line 5. Okay. Bartek, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Praise to be Jesus Christ. Thank you for your work. I admire your work. I see from
Thank
some
you.
months. And so that's my question. Do not take your time. I wanted to ask about some practice of church about beatifying some women, so-called defensum castiati, so defending the chastity. So the women who defend against the rapist and successfully defend the chastity, but they were murdered, yes, and were beatified as martyrs. And some people questionize this practice because they ask why church didn't beatify the girl who was raped and were murdered. Some people see this as some injustice, as some discrimination of women. I don't agree with that, but
Bartek, I just gotta make sure that everybody who's listening can understand the question because it's a little bit hard to hear you. But there are saints who have been beatified or canonized because they were women who defended themselves from rape or murdered. But there were other women who were raped and murdered who were not canonized or beatified. So why the discrepancy, Jimmy?
Well, so the church is in the business of holding up examples to the Catholic faithful, and almost always that's going to be someone who is Catholic. So if someone got raped and murdered who is not a Catholic, they ordinarily would not be a candidate for canonization in the Catholic Church. Their own faith community, if they had one, though, might canonize them. They also might be honored and held up as a public, example of, this was a heroic woman who had this horrible thing happen to her. And they might be held up, even by secular people. Here in the United States, there's a group that's very pro-abortion, but they're called the National Organization for Women. And they do call attention to women who have been raped and murdered, even though they're a completely secular organization that doesn't even like Christianity. So it's not a question of should these women and their horrible experiences be recognized. They should, and they, broadly speaking, are. But in terms of why would some of them get canonized in the Catholic Church, it's like, well, okay, they were Catholics, and so they had additional consideration or options for being canonized in the Catholic Church that a non-Catholic wouldn't have, since the purpose of canonizing someone is to hold them up to the Catholic faithful as an example. And if you're holding up someone as an example for Catholics and say, this is a good example to follow, you want them to be able to follow that person's religion too. And so you want to hold up Catholics to them. Certainly under ordinary circumstances, although there could be exceptions. But it's not a matter of discriminating against different people and saying what happened to them isn't as good. It's just a question of what's the purpose of canonization, and typically that's to hold up Catholics to Catholics as good examples.
Bartek, we're delighted to get the call from Poland. I hope we'll have longer time to talk next time. I know you're calling in the middle of the night. But that does it for us. Thank you, Jimmy Akin. Enjoyed the hour.
My pleasure. Likewise.
Tomorrow, I think we got more open forum. 2 hours. We'll see you then, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.